Hello and welcome once again. Moving straight on with your comments and questions. The first is an old chestnut. That is a very frequently asked question that I'll just answer quickly on this occasion. But it has come up previously if you want a more in-depth answer. Is caffeine an intoxicant? No. I've just had a cup of coffee and that is allowed. It's a stimulant. That is the content we're referring to of caffeine, of coffee, yes, or tea, or even those caffeinated drinks. Caffeine is a stimulant, not an intoxicant. However, anything can become intoxicating, as I will discuss later with another comment that's coming up, a question with regards to the intoxication of youth. And I'll speak about that further shortly. So it's your attachment to the cup of coffee or the caffeine itself that can become intoxicating, lead to heedlessness as opposed to mindfulness, not the substance, the caffeine itself. Whereas with an intoxicant, the nature of that, its very meaning, intoxicating, is to dull the senses, to reduce mindfulness, and therefore reduce inhibitions, give oneself, say, Dutch courage, an old expression meaning make you a little bit more brave, do things you wouldn't ordinarily do, really through a lack of care, a lack of mindfulness. That's what intoxicants lead to. Coffee does not do that. And I'll just quickly throw in my usual analogy on the subject. If your airline pilot or your brain surgeon is responsible for you, the airline pilot flying the jet is drinking a cup of coffee before his flight, or the surgeon before he performs brain surgery on you has a cup of coffee before that operation, it's perfectly okay. But if he drinks a large whiskey or vodka, it isn't. There's quite a significant difference there. Okay. As monks often seem to practice and live in quiet environments, does that mean urban areas and cities are unsuitable for deeply practicing Buddhism? And as the majority of the world's population are found within cities, will Buddhism die out as the world becomes more and more populated? Thank you. Okay, just addressing the second part of that question. A lot of questions refer to this modern day and age being significantly different to the past. And yes, of course it is, in many, many ways. But what remains the same are firstly our root defilements of greed, hatred and delusion. These are the root defilements, the causes of suffering for all beings. And they have remained consistent. And our practice, by way of going about a way of life to eradicate those, is hindered, has obstacles in its way, obstacles on that path, that noble eightfold path of practicing sila, moral virtue, samadhi, meditation, and developing wholesome mind states, reducing unwholesome mind states, or wisdom, that is panya. Those hindrances are sensual desire, ill will, laziness, restlessness and worry, and doubt. Those hindrances have always been the same, albeit they take, throughout the ages, varying and different forms. So in this day and age, for instance, we have technology as a major distraction in our lives, or in your lives, not so much mine. I can just turn everything off after this talk, which is what I do. But in the time of the Buddha, you're talking of busy cities, he became enlightened, yes, in a peaceful and quiet place. But he didn't do this straight away. He tried all kinds of things, traveling around to different groups and organizations of people, groups of ascetics, meeting up with different practitioners of different philosophies, religions and faiths, but ultimately came to Bodh Gaya, sitting under the Bodhi tree, where he was enlightened. He was not undisturbed during that meditation, during that period. In fact, he had Mara, who is the personification of those defilements, those kilesas, greed, hatred and delusion, doing, I say his or hers, it's a mythological personification, but it's best to distract him. And you'll find this, even if you go for deeply practicing your Buddhism to a sensory deprivation chamber, a completely secluded environment, you will not get away from your mind's distractions and disturbances. And it is that we are wishing to train. Now, as with any training, any practice, learning, we need assistance in the beginning. So it is true that, yes, before we've been able to develop deeply absorbed states of meditation we call samadhi, or even further to that, jhana, where we're fully secluded from those hindrances, fully secluded from bodily feeling and mental proliferation or thought, and at peace, tranquility, calmness, a state of mind we refer to as samatha, peace and tranquility, which leads to vipassana, seeing clearly the nature of all things, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self or things being out of our control. Until that stage, we need assistance. So yes, we go to practice in supportive environments, such as temples or monasteries, and they may not always be available to you. But this today is no different to then, 2,569 years ago, in the time of the Buddha, when shortly after his enlightenment, the Buddha travelled to the holy city of Benares, which is now the modern-day city of Varanasi. I say modern-day city, it is purported to be the oldest still surviving city in the world. It predates Buddhism by some 3,000 years historically, by record, and therefore is very well known, at that time being the capital of silk production and the marketplace for silk along that very famous Silk Road, or actually a bit off that very famous Silk Road. But a lot of the silk that's referred to in that name, Silk Road, would have come from Benares. Benares silk, as it is still called today, is world famous. But it was also an epicenter for many different religions and faiths, being on the river Ganges, the holy river Ganges, and the ghats there for burning of all of the dead. And even back then, India was a very highly populated country as it is today. And that city was perhaps more chaotic, and is now more chaotic and busier than any city you can expect to find these days, as you say, with the population becoming more and more. You'll never find a more crowded, distracting, busy place and easy place to get lost in, as I have, than Varanasi, as it is today. And it would not be any different today than it was 3,569 years ago. If you look at the architecture, if you look at the streets, the door sizes, the widths of the streets, you can see evidence of it being unchanged. Yet the Buddha chose this as the place to head to go and teach the Dharma, his first discourse, the Dhammacakka, the turning of the wheel, the putting the wheel in motion, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. This is at the very core of Buddhist teaching that I just referred to, Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right meditation. That's the Noble Eightfold Path. Arriving at Varanasi, it was, yes, rather busy, terribly busy. And he saw no way he could find and teach the Dharma in such a very diverse and busy, chaotic, and albeit very religious place with all of the rites and rituals going on. So he just walked another 10 or 20 kilometres, approximately 15 miles, to the nearby town of, as it was then, the deer park, Isipitana. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, but it's now called Sarnath, where there is still the deer park. It's fenced off, but the main reason people go there these days is because it is the site of the Buddha's first teachings, not far from that big city where he taught the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path to those 5 ascetics. And I spoke about that in detail recently. But as you see, even in your busy cities, you don't have to go far to find nature, find the countryside. Even if you walk, you don't have to have a car, a bicycle, a bus. You could set off and find a quiet place. Even within modern cities these days, there are parks. Or, if there aren't parks and green spaces available, there are religious places that may not be associated with Buddhism, but are peaceful and quiet places for you to sit. There are libraries. There are educational establishments that open their facilities to some, and not all. But there's always somewhere, even within your home, if you cannot escape your 4 walls, there's a corner somewhere you can migrate to. But yes, you're correct in that it is difficult to practice, and the Buddha recommends for monastics, as you say, most monks often seem to practice and live in quiet environments, that they retreat to either a community, a monastery with other monks. They can live in a cave, under a tree, in an empty building, as I've chosen, which we've cleaned up a little, or just simply in the open air, as long as it is a peaceful and quiet environment for them to be undistracted, but more importantly, because they will still be distracted by their minds. We are still distracted by our minds, even monks. Most importantly, we're separated from society. But it is also written, it's our rules, it's in our Vinaya, our code of conduct, that we mustn't be further than a short walking distance, to that nearest village, town or city, in order that we go into that town, village or city to collect alms each and every day, the food we eat. And where people see, by seeing us, seeing the sight of the samana, if you remember, one of those 4 heavenly messengers that first intrigued the Buddha and inspired him to go out seeking himself. We're not seeking, we're looking within. Through this practice, we have the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha didn't have that privilege. He had to find this out for himself. So at first, yes, he sought. But now, through his seeking, we don't have to look any further than within this fathom length, as it's described in the sutta, body, which is this bag of skin containing horrible things. In this, the body, with mindfulness of the body, to assist with that, mindfulness of the breath, bringing us into the present moment here and now, we can uncover that wisdom, that knowledge, see the enlightenment already within us. So the Buddha chose this quieter deer park outside of Varanasi for those initial teachings. He also prescribed that monastics go and live in quiet places where we are bound by that connection with the nearest village, town or city, as I am here, to be able to go into there each and every morning for alms round, therefore keeping in contact with society. So even the most seemingly reclusive monastic or monastic community is duty bound and does remain in contact with lay people, the rest of society, by way of its dependence on lay people, the rest of the society. And it was the Buddha's prediction that, yes, Buddhism will not last forever, as are all things impermanent, unsatisfactory, and out of our control. Even the Buddha Sasana, the Buddhist religion, he predicted to survive only 5,000 years, it is said. And we're 2,569 years through that, so halfway. But for our purposes, only halfway, and many, many generations to come, whom will benefit from this Buddha's teachings. We're not talking about previous Buddhas or future Buddhas, which are way beyond our concept of time. But in the reality of this time and understanding of time, in the reality of this space and understanding of space, in the reality of these bodies and their elements of solidity, liquidity, gaseousness, temperature, space within not only the bodies themselves, but the atoms and molecules that make up these bodies are largely space, integrating with all that space around us in nature and in the universe as a whole. In that sense, we are all one. The solid floors, the bricks, the walls around us in a city or in nature are all just the elements. So we look at that as being wherever we are, as being a place we can practice meditation. Of course, wherever we are, we can keep our precepts. And that is the practice towards developing wisdom. So yes, like learning to swim, we might have floats, or learning to ride a bicycle, we'll have stabilizers to assist with that. Eventually, we can take those off. So our aim is not to run away and hide in seclusion. And monks can't do that. We have to go into the town each day. And like I said, that's how we survive, and that's how Buddhism survives, by lay people's dependence on the Sangha. It's an interdependent relationship. The Buddha described it as the fourfold assembly. That is, of bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, upasakas and upasikas, monks, nuns, laymen and laywomen. Without all four legs to the table, it becomes unstable. Whilst there's that interdependent relationship, the Buddha Sasana remains firm. So, as long as you can find somewhere to go and practice, and as new practitioners, it's encouraged that you go on meditation retreats or you find quiet places for your practice in order to support that. But it isn't ultimately the aim to go into sensory deprivation, cutting yourself off from the world. Ultimately, your aim is to be able to face all of that distraction, face the busy cities, as us monks have to do each morning. I go into a very busy marketplace. On a Monday, it's the fruit market. The other markets, the fish markets and such like, happen at different times of the day when I don't go into town. But the fruit market early on a Monday morning is quite chaotic, with many tuk-tuks. Of course, the continual traffic of the buses ferrying folks from city to city, town to town, speeding through the zones. It's just very, very busy indeed. But we walk mindfully, stepping right, stepping left, stepping right, stepping left. Even a mantra in our minds of Bhutto, Bhutto, Bhutto. Aware, seeing clearly everything around us, being careful, but undistracted by the signs, the advertising, the people. Just our eyes gazing a little in front of us. Enough to notice if someone is wanting to offer some food into our bowls. But you too can mindfully go about your duties in busy places, developing mindfulness and developing equanimity, upekkha, towards all the things you might not like, the ill will, that second of those 5 hindrances, without judgment, just knowing this isn't as you wish it to be. You wish it was otherwise, but this is how it is right now. And when you're attracted by smells of lovely food or flashing advertising boards that attract your attention, avert your gaze, guard your senses, especially if they're of an arousing nature, sensually, and bring your attention back to the breath. So cities are also a wonderful place to develop these skills, develop this practice, even at first if they don't seem so. And it isn't any different today than it was in the time of the Buddha in Varanasi, whom went out to Sarnath for his teaching and then practice. You can go out to nature wherever you are. It doesn't cost much or anything to walk somewhere and just sit and do nothing for the day in a quiet place. That's how you really practice. If you need the armbands or the floats, if you need the stabilizers to learn to swim or to learn to ride the bicycle allegorically, then that's good too, if you have them. If you don't, find other ways to support yourself. A broom cupboard under the stairs, if nothing else is available. The toilet is usually, and always in fact, usually a private place. You can sit and practice meditation as long as there's not a queue outside. So I hope that makes sense. Oh, I've gone the wrong way. A person who previously had jhanas but lost it due to some reason can't even remember what it was like to be in that state of samadhi, nor can he remember how joyful it was. Have you ever had to retry to attain a certain level of samadhi after you became a bhikkhu? So I'm not sure that we've quite got the translation right there. If that's a translation, I'm not quite sure I get the perspective. Are you a person who's had jhana and then not experienced them ever again? If that's the person writing, it kind of makes sense. You can, through your practice, experience deep levels of absorption or samadhi, or even think that that's what it is. Sometimes it's kind of a euphoric zoning out, a numbing of the senses and just a sense of relief. And there's nothing wrong with that. But don't get it confused with jhana. If you've experienced samadhi, if you've experienced jhana, you won't forget. You're saying can't even remember what it was like. You won't forget it. It cannot be unseen, it cannot be forgotten. It's an experience. But you cannot also make it happen other than practice and wait for it to happen. We don't try to get samadhi. We don't try to get jhana. We don't try to get anything or become anything. This just leads to more suffering. It creates an obstacle. We accept everything as it is. We simply sit. We wait. We observe the breath, the meditation object. If we're absorbed in samadhi, and that leads to jhana, even on just one occasion, it's okay. Don't expect that to happen every time. Don't expect it necessarily to ever happen again. You ask, have you had to retry or attain a certain level of samadhi after you became a bhikkhu? We don't have to try. There's no having to try. And your own practice is what is important, not other people's practice. But we diligently strive to develop samadhi through the foundational practice of keeping precepts and kindness to ourselves, allowing ourselves time to sit and meditate each day. Without those prerequisites, you will never attain samadhi or jhana. But with that determination, with that effort, living in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path, you will. And knowing that is enough to be able to let go of that trying, that desire, which is what trying is, to have something or become something that isn't as it is. And evidently there, from what you're describing, you're missing something you don't have at the moment, wanting something that isn't there, wanting it to be another way. That is sensual desire, the first of these 5 hindrances, these obstacles in your way, these obstacles on the path. We remove those through the antidotes to those obstacles. With sensual desire, wanting things, we look at the inherent nature of all things, being impermanent, unsatisfactory. By nature of the impermanence, they become unsatisfactory, dukkha, suffering, and that they're not within our control. This is right view, this is understanding. So it's a holistic practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, not just sama-samadhi, not just developing samadhi and jhanas. It's the way we live. So look at the whole of your existence and make sure you have time for your practice as far as sitting practice for meditation, but that you're able to keep precepts. Nothing's drawing you away from, for instance, a livelihood that is distracting you from the path by its very nature. We may be committed, duty-bound, have to work in an environment that we don't like, but you can see that as just ill will, aversion, not liking something, not having something the way we'd like it to be, but also impermanent. Of course, if you're required to break your precepts through that work activity, which is very unlikely and seldom these days, if you're a soldier and you're required to kill in times of war, it's a whole other issue. But other than that, or if you're an abattoir, working in an abattoir and you're literally the man who has to kill the animals, then you might need to reconsider your career path, your career options, get another job, as and when it's appropriate to do so. But like I said, it's very rare. We can all keep 5 precepts. They're very specific. No killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants, as we began with talking about. And that enables you to meditate, and you will experience samadhi, but only if you do it. away today all of the time. Which school of Buddhism do you practice? I'm still learning, but have considered Chan Buddhism. So I don't want to get too embroiled in discussions of traditions and schools. There are recognisably two main schools, the Northern School and Southern School, and as far as traditions are concerned, there are Mahayana, Theravada, the Tibetan or Vajrayana traditions, and Zen. And Chan Buddhism comes from Zen Buddhism. In fact, it is really the predecessor of Zen. Zen is the Japanese word for jhana, coming from Chan, which is the Chinese word for jhana. As you see, geographically coming out from India, jhana is the Pali word for deeply absorbed states of meditation originating from India. So it's just the original form of jhana, developing or practicing towards jhana, developing samadhi into more deeply absorbed levels of practice or focused attention, absorption, as I was just talking about. So we're all also, whatever tradition, Mahayana, Theravada, Vajrayana, Zen, taking refuge in the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. So the Buddha is the same common teacher throughout all of those schools and traditions. The Dharma is similarly the words, the teachings of the Buddha, but it has been culturally influenced both geographically, as I was just describing, as it moved out from India, and historically by different cultural influences picking up other philosophies, religions, practices, rites and rituals along the way. But the core teachings of Buddhism, there in the suttas, whether it be the Pali Canon in Pali, the Sutta Pitaka, the Tipitaka, the Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, and Abhidharma, the three baskets of collected teachings of the Buddha, or the Sanskrit Northern School version of that, the core teachings are the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. So I come from, or was ordained into, the Theravada tradition in India. So very much the origins, and I was ordained in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened, and the sort of holy centre, Mecca equivalent of, if you like, of Buddhism. For all versions of Buddhism, for all traditions, all schools, they all congregate on that place as a pilgrimage site, one of the four holy sites. The second being the other being that Sarnath I was referring to, the place where the Buddha first taught, Lumbini where he was born, and finally Kushinaga where he attained to Parinibbana, died. Those four holy sites in India I've lived in, practiced in, and I was ordained in one, into the Theravada tradition. It just means way of the elders. It's the sort of the most basic tradition, unaffected geographically or culturally influenced, because of it being centred, the Southern School, in India itself, and therefore having less influences, because it was created or realised by the Buddha so as to highlight itself amongst other existing religions and philosophies of the day, back in the time of the Buddha, as different, not adopting their, in fact abandoning their rites and rituals, their sacrifices, and adopting this quite different approach to practice of realizing for ourselves that we can become liberated and free from suffering within this lifetime through our own efforts experientially, rather than relying on rites, rituals and prayers to a god or higher power or other being to assist us, empowering us, giving us the tools to become enlightened without external intervention, but from within, uncovering our purity through the practice of living in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path, simply exposing what is natural and inherent within us all, a pure state of mind. So, yes, I'm of the Theravada tradition, but then of the Theravada tradition there are many other subcategories and branches, but one shouldn't get too focused on that, but focused more on the practice. Now you will find that, say, Chan Buddhism is very much more orientated towards meditation practice. And as that is my direction, that is my practice, you could say, well, I'm a Chan Buddhist or a Zen Buddhist, more than I am a Theravada Buddhist, who, for instance, in Sri Lanka or Burma, which are Theravada, associated with Theravada Buddhism, Buddhist countries, but really considered Theravada Buddhist countries, whereas China would be a Mahayana Buddhist country. But they too have many, many rites, rituals and other practices and sanghas with whom also we're taking refuge, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, whom have many other duties and activities as part of society, aspects of pastoral care they're involved in, much like priestly responsibilities in Christian countries or rabbi responsibilities in Judaic countries, or imam responsibilities in, I could be wrong here, Islamic countries. Often in countries whom are constitutionalized in the religion, or their religion has become part of a constitution, there is a whole layer of hierarchy, a whole layer of activity that Sangha gets involved in. But the core practice of a Kamatana monk, that is a monk, a Kamatana bhikkhu, I should say rather, a homeless mendicant, someone who's gone forth into the holy life to just concentrate on the practice, a bhikkhu, an alms mendicant. A Kamatana bhikkhu is one who dedicates their practice to a work, a direction. If that work is to become enlightened, it is only through keeping precepts, practicing samadhi and developing wisdom. None of those other offices that might be available and taken upon and taken the responsibility of by some Sangha members. That is their choice. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is often work that needs to be done. But it isn't the Kamatana work, the work of practicing towards enlightenment, which is only come about through keeping precepts, practicing meditation and developing wisdom. Teaching is a part of developing wisdom. It can be, because you're not only, when you teach, you're teaching students, you're teaching yourself, reminding yourself, revising your knowledge and learning from your people that you're teaching. But it can be quite a responsibility and a job that takes you away from your own practice, if that's allowed. But I think there's another comment coming up with regards to that later on, so I'll talk about that further then. But yeah, answer to your short and good question. I'm a Theravada Buddhist officially. What school do I practice? Well, I practice the school of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, the fully enlightened one, with whom I've taken and you're taking refuge, our teacher, what he taught us to do, keeping precepts, practicing meditation developing wisdom. Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Maybe time for one more. What did you give up to become a monk? Career? Question mark. Family? Question mark. Yes, all of the above. You renounce worldly life, which includes everything. Worldly life. That's when you ordain as a bhikkhu, you give up your identity even, your name. So the reason we wear these funny clothes, robes, which are given to us, they're just a simple cloth. They're nothing elaborate. They're very cheap to manufacture. In fact, monks make them themselves very often, or lay folk will stitch them together and offer them to monks, dyed with whatever comes locally, denominating its colour really. These came from people in Thailand and are dyed with the jackfruit wood, heartwood of the jackfruit tree, which is common there, and a colour you'll recognise as the Thai forest tradition colour, because that was the monasteries I was training, practicing, living in for a while, and when and where these monks, these robes were offered. So we renounce, we don't have clothes, we just have our 8 requisites, which are these robes, the lower robe, upper robe, and outer robe, the sangati, which is over there, we never really wear in hot places, a double thickness robe. It's our overcoat, if you like. That's it. Our bowl, a belt, needle and cotton, or needle and thread to repair these garments, and a razor. That's our 8 requisites. That's all we own in the world once we renounce worldly life. And we don't have any real contact with our friends or family when going forth into monastic life. We, as part of our precepts, renounce the use of money. I'm not allowed to even touch money or use money. If people offer me money on Pindapata, here I say saline, which means, I think it means no money. They seem to understand. And often they'll rush off and buy a bun or a pastry or a samosa or something and come back with that and put it in the bowl. Because we don't handle money. And yes, there are links sometimes for the Sangha to receive donations on most monastic or even other religions' websites or YouTube channels. But in the case of bhikkhus, Buddhist monks, we renounce the use of money. We can't use money. So any online, although it is necessary sometimes there are expenses, and these are met by those online donations, but those go to support Sangha requisites and are administered by lay people. So even if there might be a link for donations, it's not for monks to receive money, it's for Sangha to receive money in order that lay people can support those monks if they require medical attention. For instance, when I went to the dentist, and with regards to this project of building this beautiful meditation facility, hall for visitors, but for local people here, it all requires money. And that comes from those generous and kind donations online, but not handled by monks or myself. And career, of course, we give up a career. We no longer have a need for a career or money. We're dependent on lay folk. Those 8 requisites are given to us at our ordination, and we take very great care of them. There's my bowl, which I had at my ordination, in fact, prior to my ordination, that will hopefully be my alms bowl for receiving food each day that is given on Pindapata, as described earlier, for the rest of my life. And I've survived on given food that I haven't paid for, now for over 10 years or so, even prior to being a monk, prior to my ordination. I survived on the generosity of others, either within monastery communities, helping out there as a lay practitioner, or alone, just wandering and hoping a little bit of, as a lay practitioner, a little bit of foraging, but also relying on the generosity of others. So the renunciation is literally everything. That's what I gave up and what all bhikkhus give up. Now we'll keep in touch maybe with our mother or our father if they were still alive, and any family members whom are Buddhist practitioners. So I refer to my son quite often. I have two other sons whom I don't refer to so often because they're not Buddhist practitioners. They're not forgotten or unloved, but they have their own lives, worldly lives in society. But one of my sons is a meditator, a Buddhist practitioner, and therefore is able to visit me, not often because he lives in the UK, but on occasions, since I've been in Sri Lanka, he's been able to visit me twice. But he leaves me to my practice and goes and practices meditation himself on retreats in Anuradhapura and places of this nature, the holy sites of Sri Lanka, and gets on with his own practice because he fully understands the rules of a bhikkhu, Sangha life, that a bhikkhu has renounced family, renounced friends, given up all that. It's not that you don't love them and care for them, and if they're in need, they'll contact you. But whilst they're happy, there's no need for daily chit-chat, or idle chit-chat, or sampapalapa, as we call it, talk that isn't useful. Useful to the practice, that is. Just useful for making time go by, fill the silent spaces, but not useful or productive in terms of the practice. So it is all this we give up as when we ordain as a bhikkhu. If our mothers or other family members become sick, we can go and attend to them. More specifically, our mothers are particularly noted. And I refer to my own mother as the only family member I speak of really also, because she's in her 80s, aging. Eventually she'll sicken and she'll die. And this is something I'll attend to at the time. But she's not a Buddhist practitioner. Now the Buddha went forth leaving his own family, abandoning them in the middle of the night. But ultimately, his legacy to them was the Dharma. And that was what he had to do, to practice, to realize the Dharma, to become enlightened. And then he welcomed his stepmother into the fold, or his auntie that brought him up, also his stepmother, who ordained as a bhikkhuni, and also his son, Rahula, whom became one of his disciples. But his father and the rest of the family, whom weren't a part of the Sangha, are not talked about much. It really is a life of renunciation and stepping out of worldly life, which is so full of dust and clutter, it's described in the ordination process. You want to leave it all behind for the life of a bhikkhu, going forth into ordination. That's what we literally do. Ehi bhikkhu, go forth bhikkhu. Away from the dusty, cluttered world of worldly life into a life of solitude and practice. So I gave up all of that. Of course, you give up intoxicants, intoxicants and anything that's in breach of those 5 precepts a long time before you can even consider being a bhikkhu. And people thinking ordination is a path to giving up, say, drinking or drugs. Yes, it can be a means to an end, but that isn't the purpose of it. You should be really ready to ordain and therefore free from addiction, or physical addiction, let's say, to substance. So someone with substance abuse issues needs to resolve those medically, I would suggest, prior to being able to successfully live the monastic life. Otherwise it could be detrimental both to their physical and mental health, and also detrimental to the balance and of the Sangha. But it's a great incentive to give up intoxicants, to keep the other 4 precepts, and to practice until after maybe 3 months or a year or 3 years even, you feel ready to go and start staying in monasteries, staying in and helping out as a part of the Sangha in the capacity of a layperson. And then slowly but surely, over another few years, you may feel ready for ordination. It isn't an instant fix. It isn't quick. It takes many years. But then you know you've made the right decision, or something, taken action that is appropriate to you and backed up by your practice. On that note, I think I shall leave it there. If there's anything useful, please use it. If not, then just let it go. Keep the comments coming in, and you can email me. The email address is on the channel description page, and any other information you require you can get via that email, or is there written on the channel description page. There are also updates quite regularly, which are just photographs on the posts section of that channel description page. I think you all understand how that works better than I do. All I do is quickly take 5 photographs each day of the progress, or what I see as progress from my perspective. I'm sure there's a lot of work that I don't see or recognize, but it's moving. I'm referring to the meditation hall next door there. It's moving on very quickly and very well, very efficiently, and I'll keep you up to date by way of those photographs as best I can. I hope that's useful and that you get to see them. Any feedback on that, if you're not getting to see them or there's a better way, then I'm open to suggestions. But I don't want to start making videos about buildings and things. That's not a monk's job. It's quite okay once the builder's finished at the end of the day. I like to go and have a look around myself, and whilst doing that I use this device to quickly snap a few very amateur photographs. That's the extent of my involvement there. On that note, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.